אני אדבר באנגלית לא מכיוון שיותר קל לי, אלא להפך, אלא מכיוון שהכנתי את ההרצאה באנגלית. אז זה יהיה, אני חושב שיותר קוהרנטי גם לדבר באנגלית. I'll speak in English. And I believe that will make our life easier for those guests who came from abroad. And it will save some time because it won't have to be translated. And I'm afraid of interpreters. And I'll tell you why. Because there's a story about a thief who stole a horse. He was brought to the court, but he didn't speak the language. So the judge asked for an interpreter. The interpreter came in. The judge said, okay, ask the man if he stole the horse. So they started a conversation. It took about 20 minutes. It's about the time that I have to speak. And after 20 minutes, the interpreter said, Your Honor, the man says no. So the judge asked what we were speaking and conversating with him before the last quarter of an hour. So meanwhile, I bought his horse for him. So I don't want to spend the 20 minutes that I have in interpretations. And my subject is, first of all, it is based on studies that we conducted at the Wells Company. It was not prepared especially for here. Some adaptations have been made. And the Wells Company deals with anti-ballistic missile defense for the last, I believe, 25 years. Personally, I began dealing with ballistic missiles since the time that they were introduced into the Middle East. I was then in uniform. The subject is the outcome of the Gaza conflict, which is considered, I believe, by most people a big success. In intercepting rockets, short-range rockets, but I believe that it might have an impact on perception of the chances of long-range ballistic missiles and the perception of what the value of those missiles will be in the future. And I believe that there's something to be learned. I include it in the lessons that we can learn from one of the original objectives of the ballistic missile defense, the strategic defense initiative in the early days of what was called the Star Wars, was to discourage adversaries from investing in the research, development, procurement, and proliferation of ballistic missiles. The question is whether that can be achieved. And let me go back here. I have some problems here with changing the slides. זה הולך למעלה למטה פה? או רק מכאן? אוקיי. רק מפה אפשר הולך? כאן זה לא הולך? אוקיי. אוקיי, זה בסדר. אוקיי. Can you hear me there? The success of the Iron Dome, and I must stress that when I'm speaking about Iron Dome, it can represent other systems which do not exist, but which might come up in the future of similar capabilities. And I believe that what was proven by the Iron Dome is important, regardless of whether it is this system or other one. I believe the Iron Dome is the only one that proved it. And the question is if the lessons learned, are they relevant at all to longer range ballistic missiles, the middle range missiles, hundreds of kilometers, or the long range, thousands of kilometers. And I'm speaking here in this region about Iran. So, in the early days, the challenge was, and people did not believe that it is possible, what was called then the probability and the chances of hitting a bullet with a bullet, and I quote, a bullet with a bullet, it was a term. And many people believe that it is not possible at all. During some failures, many successes, and various systems all over the world, it has been shown in simulations, in theoretical studies, that it is possible, and with time it was proven in experiments and in tests at the test range. So that today, after we have several systems which showed that you can hit a bullet with a bullet, I believe that people are convinced that it is possible, but still, up to this time, of most places, we are speaking about a one-on-one scenario. It was a challenge to have one target in the sky, to have one interceptor, and to succeed in bringing them together in somewhere in the battle space. It does not mean that you can hit two bullets with two bullets simultaneously. It has to be proven. It cannot be taken into as granted. And of course, in a real scenario, in real war, as was proven in Lebanon and in the Gaza Strip, when the war is going on, you have many targets and you have many interceptors and you have what we call the many-on-many scenarios. And one has to prove that in these real battle conditions, these defense systems are potent and they can do their job. So going from the one-on-one scenarios to the many-on-many scenarios took some effort. And again, the experts went back to the drawing table to the theoretical analysis, show that it is possible. Even in simulations, you can show that it's possible. But you have to be careful with simulation, because after many successful simulations, one tends to believe that the simulation represents the real scenario. It does not. So going to the field, that's another step, important step forward. And I believe that it has been proven, and that's the importance in this presentation, in addition to other contributions of the defense and the success of the Iron Dome. It has been proven in principle that it is manageable, and you can intercept many targets simultaneously in a real battle conditions where you work under stress and you have all the real problems that you have to face when operating complex systems. Now you can see at the bottom on the left, you have a picture of several missiles in the sky being intercepted. I believe that you can count there about 5 or 6, doesn't matter why. It's not the maximum that has been intercepted concurrently in the Gaza conflict. I don't think that the real number was ever revealed. I believe it's not my task to do it so now. But one has to remember that it is possible. It has been done in the early stages of the introduction of that system to the field. And I believe that with further development, you can imagine that it will be done in a much better way with many more missiles going into the tens. I believe that it's a credible statement. Okay, so the question is whether these results can be achieved with other systems. But first, let's go to some statistics. I rely on numbers published by the Institute of National Security Studies. That's the place we are sitting now. And the success rate of 85% of the missiles or the rockets, and still we are speaking about rockets, 85% of the rockets that were targeted, that were selected for intercept, That's, I believe, an extremely impressive result. And of course, it is out of a much higher number of launches. But most of those launches were predicted to impact empty areas where no targets were present. So it is, you can call it a selective or intercept, but still, out of those that were targeted, a success of 85% is impressive and very promising. Now, going to the next, by the way, it was not the first time. Similar results, or even higher, were achieved in earlier engagements on the Lebanese border. So it's not a single time event. The question is whether you can achieve those with, when you are speaking about long-range ballistic missiles launched from Iran or from deep in Syria or any other place in the future. And there is a big difference between rockets launched to 20, 40 of kilometers and missiles launched to 2,000 kilometers in several parameters. Of course, velocity is one of them, which introduces some stress on the defense. So I would like to analyze the differences in between the missiles and the rockets, long-range missiles and short-range rockets, three parameters. One, the technologies involved. One, the conditions. And to stress the third one, those conditions where the requirements are more relaxed in ballistic missiles than in rockets. They are that type as well. So let's go to technologies. By technology, I mean not only the technical part of the missile. The technology includes the hardware, the software, the logic, algorithms, battery control centers, the man-in-the-loop decision-making, prioritizing, discrimination, which is a challenge, and so on. So when you take all of them and you check, and we do not have time to go into details, there are many similarities in the process while intercepting short-range rockets and long-range ballistic missiles. Many of the technologies are the same, not all of them. Of course, you have to remember that if you are speaking about sensors, you have to pick up the target at 2,000 kilometers. That's much more difficult than picking it up at 20 kilometers. So there's a difference in the sensors. There's a difference in the airborne sensors on the interceptor itself. And you introduce additional requirements at long range. Nevertheless, there are some in which the requirements are, as I said, more I mentioned the range. We have in the ballistic missiles much higher velocities. Much higher velocity means that you have to act during the intercept in the critical parts, not all along the way for the 12 or 13 or 14 minutes of flying, but at the critical stages you have to act much faster. You need a much more agile system. These are differences which have to be taken into consideration. There is another aspect which I believe we'll have to face, not now in the future, when you go to a large, big ballistic missile, you have some additional options which are available, as, for example, penetration aids. Just to explain in short words, the pen aids. These are additional features on the ballistic missile, or used by the ballistic missile, or ejected from the ballistic missile, which will spoil the sky view and will make intercept and decision-making much more difficult. When you have a big missile, you have more weight capacity, more volume, and you have the conditions that enable you to operate some additional or to introduce pennies, which will be, I believe, much more difficult to insert and to carry on a small rocket. So that's a dimension that will have to be brought into consideration. But still, I want to point out those conditions in which ballistic missiles are easier to intercept, and we go to some of them. First, the geometric dimension of the target. Instead of having a rocket which is, say, about 12 centimeters in diameter, I believe that's one of the typical the grads, 122 millimeter. You have a missile which can be in diameter more than 1 meter. Some of them can reach 2 meters or so. Instead of having a 3 or 4 meters long rocket, you have something which goes up in some stages to 10, 12 in the launch and the boost phase, which does not interest us. You have that large, let's say, a cone in the sky. And when you go back and consider of hitting a bullet with a bullet, it is much easier to hit a target which is 1.5 meter in diameter than the 10 centimeters. Whether you hit it or you just come very close to it in order to operate a proximity fuse. In that respect, the big target is easier. Next, you have more time. You can pick up the target at long range before you are required to fire your interceptor. You follow it for some time. You have more time for decision making, for understanding what's going on. The battle space is much deeper. You have more opportunities to launch more than one interceptor. You can launch one interceptor to wait a few seconds, launch another one. So you have time for 2 or 3 interceptors. It depends on the rules of engagement, on the doctrine you apply. But you have more intercept opportunities, or what we call the intercept window is much bigger. So the chance, the probability that you can hit it goes up. Of course, there's another parameter. There's the number of targets in the sky. One cannot imagine, and I believe it will never happen, that any of your enemies will fire many missiles as were fired in the Gaza Strip. You have one rocket launcher with 40 tubes, and you can, in 15 or 20 seconds, launch all those 40 rockets, which will appear simultaneously in the sky as a train. To intercept those, you have to work very fast, make decisions, and have a very, very fast reacting system. I cannot imagine 20 or even 10 ballistic missiles coming together, closely spaced as rockets. And that means that the sky view is much clearer. And of course, you are fighting in a battle space where you do not have other targets, like, for example, aircraft, fighters, or helicopters, or UAVs, because in Gaza, you have in the same battle space not only rockets and your interceptors, but aircraft, and you have to be very careful. There is a problem of fratricide, of flying safety, and so on. So that's a stress on the decision maker and the soldiers who have to fire the missile to make these decisions. When you have the long-range ballistic missiles, you do not have those problems. The sky view is clearer, you have fewer targets, you have more opportunities to fire. And there is something else which is very important, and people who work and they deal with guidance systems and guidance laws probably will appreciate that when you are dealing with ballistic missiles, the trajectories in the vacuum out of the atmosphere, they are more predictable. You can predict the future intercept point because the target is following a very clean Keplerian trajectory, and you can predict exactly at what time where that target will reach, and to direct your interceptors straight to that point. In that case, that doesn't work when you are in the atmosphere, what we call in endo-atmospheric conditions, when the atmosphere and the aerodynamic forces, they influence the trajectory and change it, and sometimes they distort it, and you have some unintentional maneuvers introduced due to various reasons that I'm not going to. So all those conditions and the multi-tier, which I mentioned, mean that in some respect, and in many respects, intercept of ballistic missiles might be or could be easier. And what I want to stress, and it has to be worked out, and I believe that it will be done. I would say that we do not have to consider intercept of a longer range missiles as automatically being more complex and more difficult than the Gaza Strip intercept of the rockets. So the conclusion is that from a cost point of view, in the past we said you spend a lot of money on an expensive interceptor in order to shoot down a cheap missile. Now, if the technology and what I'm preaching here works, then we have to reconsider the ratio between investment in interceptors and investment, the other side's investment in ballistic missiles, as worth reconsidering, and it becomes for him more expensive because the success is not promised or is not guaranteed. And the cost effectiveness of the whole concept should be reconsidered, or is worth reconsidering. If that is done, and of course that's one of the conclusions of the Gaza Strip, you don't have to look only on the cost, and I believe it was said many times, that the cost of the interceptor versus the cost of the target is not the only factor to be considered, but the damage saved, that's another factor that has to be put into the equation, and I believe that the Gaza, the war in Gaza, I believe that it showed, and I believe it demonstrated what's the extent of damage that was saved. And when we did not succeed to intercept, you could check the price, the cost in the damaged property, lives, and so on. So, to conclude my presentation, my claim is that the success of the Iron Dome in Gaza has a much wider implication, and in a much wider perspective, it's worth considering, and I believe it's not only worth considering, but I believe it's our task to make it known to the world and to those who consider developing, procuring, and introducing ballistic missile, proliferation of ballistic missiles, because the success rate and the cost effectiveness of it, I believe it looks different than it looked 20 years ago when we started dealing with that, and it's something for the other side to consider. So going back to a slide that I only showed you already, that statement made at the beginning of the Star Wars, the Strategic Defense Initiative, I believe we are closer to implementation or to achieving that goal than we were in the past, and I believe that's the main message that we I would like to convey. I thank you very much for your...